It's interesting. So I went to school in the 80s and 90s, but the 80s in particular was a time when Section 28 was in force. Sort of being gaslighted by the government is pretty major, right? So we didn't exist.
Welcome to Queer Coded. My name is Eli.
I'm Emily. If you've not joined us before, we are just chatting to some members of the Northcoders community who are also part of the LGBTQIA community. Just a nice fireside, relaxed chat about our experience into the world of tech. Today with us, we have Stephen. Stephen, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself, what you do here?
Sure, Emily. I am a junior software engineer and mentor to the students at Northcoders. And I'm a career changer, actually. So I've been with Northcoders for 3 months. After a very long career in hospitality and sometimes spent in finance, I am now a software developer.
Fantastic. What made you kind of like switch over to that?
Great question. I think for a long time I was unhappy with work, with my career.
Yeah.
And like many people living through the pandemic, reflected on where I was in life. And then, like many people also, got COVID quite early on, and then had long COVID. So I think when you're doing a job that you're okay with and you're in good health, you kind of deal with it, right? It's fine. When you wake up every day with brain fog, lethargy, aches, no energy, and then try to do a job that you're only really okay with, it becomes a lot harder. So I'm kind of, in a strange way, grateful for the COVID, for sort of forcing my hand a little bit and forcing me to make decisions about what I did next.
Yeah. But what specifically pushed you towards something like coding?
So I literally Googled skill shortages in the UK, and the first thing that came up was software developer.
Yeah, amazing.
And sort of initially said, well, I can't do that. What do I know about software? What do I know about tech? And then did a little bit more Googling and found Northcoders. And then still felt like it wasn't for me, felt like maybe I was a little bit too old. It would be difficult for me to pick it up. And then explored it a little bit further and started to sort of dabble with Free Code Camp and Code Academy and these sorts of things. And then finally plucked up the courage to fill in the form and start the journey.
Oh, fantastic. What was your kind of like first experience around tech? Because you're saying like it was quite a late in life thing to do this for yourself.
Yeah.
What was like your first experience of that kind of thing, and what led you to it?
Yeah, I've made myself sound like a dinosaur there, which is certainly not true. So I mean, for me, really, the journey would have started in the mid '80s. My first experience of tech was a Sinclair ZX Spectrum playing 8-bit computer games, and we used to buy the magazines, and they'd have type-in programs. So you would literally just sit and type in lines and lines and lines of code, and a box would appear on the screen, and it was a massive sense of achievement, right? So that's sort of the 80s, and then nothing really. Went to uni, ended up in hospitality, did a few different jobs over the years. Around about, I would say, turn of the millennium. Dabbled a little bit with building websites just as a hobby sort of thing. And then again, nothing. So it's not as if I had no experience whatsoever. There was something in there. There was something that I was drawn to in that, which I suppose helped me make the leap a little bit when I finally convinced myself that it'd be a good idea.
Yeah. And in terms of your sort of career path in general, what's the impact that you think that being LGBTQIA has had on that career path for you?
It's interesting. So I went to school in the 80s and 90s, but the 80s in particular was a time when Section 28 was in force, and sort of being gaslighted by the government is pretty major, right? So we didn't exist.
Could I just interrupt you there? We might have some listeners who might not really know about Section 28. Could you just really expand a little bit for us?
So in a nutshell, it was illegal for anybody to promote homosexuality, to talk about it, to acknowledge it in any way. In schools, it was just no go. It wasn't up for discussion. So that's kind of that's the environment I grew up in. So you spend a lot of time hiding who you are, because that's essentially how the system has brought you up. So you expend a lot of energy in life, but also at work, not being honest with people and not being honest with yourself. And that's a lot of energy that could be expended elsewhere, I suppose. In terms of direct discrimination, do I feel that I've experienced it? Probably not. But working environments haven't always been pleasant because of some of the stuff you have to hear, some of the stuff that would be called banter. It's not always fun.
How do you feel like your career experience has changed from your different career paths? Like how do you feel? How did you feel then? How did you feel now about it?
I think I feel lucky where I work. There's no doubt that Northcoders is the most inclusive environment I've ever found myself in. As far as work goes, as far as anything goes, really. I worked for a corporate before I worked here, and corporates are great, right? Because there is a lot of awareness of representation. There are employee-led networks for everything. But it can sometimes feel a little bit tick boxy. And although it reaches many parts of the organisation, it doesn't necessarily reach them all. At Northcoders, I think the scale and the personal experience you have with other people and how open and honest people are really is something that I've not had before in my working life. And it's something that is helping me to grow as a person as well, because, it's easy to be aware of issues, but not really feel like they impact you. But when you have friends and colleagues that have that become allies in a way you become allies too, that helps you grow and develop as a person. So that's been something that's been really nice for me over the last few months.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely understand that. I used to work in retail and for a big store, and it was definitely like I came out while I was working there, and everyone was very supportive, minus one person. We shan't name names, but she very quickly retired. Anyway, it was definitely more kind of like I felt supported when I came out. I felt like I wasn't going to lose my job. I felt like the company was going to be on my side. I didn't feel supported in the way that I do here. And it's a very hard thing to like pin down what the difference is. But I would say it's more kind of like it's like you're saying, like a bit of a checkbox. It's more that the company doesn't want to get sued.
Yeah.
As opposed to they actually care about and support these issues.
Absolutely. I think I've actually got quite a good example of that, of where I previously worked when I first told everyone about being trans. And I think at Northcoders, it's something where people actively ask you what your pronouns are. Whereas in that situation, I told someone my pronouns and they said, "What's a pronoun?" I think that's really the difference. It's kind of living that thing and making that a priority versus it being something that you have to do to make sure that you don't get sued by someone.
Yeah, it's a kind of feeling of in other places having to justify your existence almost, whereas here it's just accepted. Like there's no kind of like, oh, are you queer enough to act this way? Essentially, like. Are you trans enough to transition fully? Are you going to be supported if you transition fully? It was more just here. It's kind of like, cool, fab, amazing. Anything we can do to help. And then everyone just kind of supports you. It's not just like, fab, all right, we'll leave now and let you get on with it. It's like everyone just kind of like pitches in and goes, what can we do to actually help you with this? Is there anything way we can feel more comfortable?
Absolutely. And it's no surprise that diverse organisations that support their staff to be who they are more successful. It takes time and energy to deal with discriminatory behaviour and to call it out when you see it. And we should do that, right? We should. And we should do it in the best possible way because that's how we grow and change and develop. But it's kind of nice to be in an environment where you don't feel that that's going to come up.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In terms of sort of the wider tech industry, sort of sometimes we can feel like we're maybe in a bubble where we live or where we work or in our social media. But in terms of sort of the wider tech industry, is there anything that you would like to see change, in the foreseeable?
I suppose I'm not overly qualified to say, right? I've been in the industry for 3 months at Northcoders, 3 months doing the course, so really quite a short time. But what is overwhelmingly obvious is how male-dominated the industry is, which I think is really unfortunate. I understand why it's happened, but I feel like that's something that needs to change and change rapidly. Northcoders, really are playing their part in that, but we're so far from where we need to be. And ultimately, women in code will make code better. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you said, and I don't want to feel like I'm pulling you out on this, I understand why it's male dominated. What is your opinion on that? Like, why do you think it's male dominated at the moment? What could we do to change that?
Because understanding and accepting are two different things. But traditionally, it goes back to school, right? It goes back to the way subjects are taught at school. Boys tend to do those, subjects like maths, subjects like physics, the sort of subjects that then lead into sort of computer science degrees. It starts very, very early on in these sort of gender-defined roles. But, this can change quite quickly. You can do a boot camp. You can come to Northcoders and do a boot camp and 13 weeks later be a software developer. So we can forget about all of that, right? We can change this now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also, coming back to what you were saying previously about Section 28 and the impact that the government has on our culture, we can't ignore the sort of the impact that has had on those gender-defined paths and people taking those particular subjects because they are sort of encouraged to go into that if they are, a male or female identified.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So in terms of, we've spoken a little bit about the tech industry. In terms of the wider world, are there any changes that you think you would like to see, further afield than the tech industry?
So many.
Tell us all of them.
I've seen a lot of change, right? We talked about Section 28. And now kids come out of school. Mm-hmm. I wasn't able to imagine a world where that would happen.
Yeah,
growing up in the 80s. A world where queer people are so visible. I didn't envisage that happening. The change has been quick, right? Okay,
yeah.
You look at civil rights movements and look at how things have moved on for some queer people, not all queer people, but some queer people. And it's to do with visibility, because there aren't many families that don't have, well, there aren't any families, let's face it, that don't have queer people in them. I think I've been really angry in the past. When I was younger, I was angry. Maybe at times confrontational. I don't think it achieves anything. And I'm concerned that we're in a world now that we've achieved so much, but the world seems to be decamping, mm-hmm. and the different sides seem to be incapable of speaking to each other. I'm alarmed by things like no platforming. I'm alarmed by people that close down speech, because I think it's only through talking and understanding why somebody is homophobic, for example, only by having the conversation and letting them express their opinions can you start to challenge it and change it. I don't like it when I hear people say, you can't say that. People can say what they want. Yeah. People can literally say what they want. It's just that now they might be challenged. And that's the way to change opinions in my mind.
That's absolutely different. I think that, a huge part of the thing of cancel culture is like the thing of sort of, you can say whatever you want to, but also you need to be prepared to face the challenges that people have to what you've said and take responsibility for that and be accountable for it. Which I think is something that is kind of hasn't really happened very much in the past. And, people are entitled to say what they want to, but also they do have to be accountable for it.
I think that brings up a really interesting discussion, because I agree. We do need to have these conversations, and I really don't like that term for some reason. It sounds a bit like, I don't know, aggravating almost. But there's a difference between someone maybe not understanding things about, let's say, like trans people, and then there's a difference of someone else who has power saying and influencing other people into those kind of opinions, which, who are you really going to listen to more? If you already have that kind of attitude of believing someone who has more power than you, it's very unlikely you're going to have the opportunity to talk to someone who is trans, is queer, and have your mind changed in that discussion. So I think it's definitely not a case of just everyone say what you want and we'll talk about it. I think everyone has to be open to talking about it. I think that is a much different issue, which I also don't know how to solve.
Well, I agree, but I think unfortunately the responsibility lies with the queer community, if I'm honest. Talking about people in power and talking about Section 28, well, the whole government denied our existence, right? And look at where we are now. And I think maybe I'm a bit of an optimist. Maybe I just assume the best in people because generally, people are decent. Most people are decent and want the best for their families. And I kind of think that getting people to reflect on their own situations and demonstrating, I don't know, your own lived experience is the way to win. Win might not be the right word, but genuinely could be your son, your niece, your nephew, your brother, your sister. Yeah. If we can all learn to walk in each other's shoes a little bit. And that kind of means us walking in the shoes of people that we find intolerant and trying to understand why they are like that.
I think that's a really fantastic point. And I think the thing that I've found in terms of sort of visibility and speaking to people and changing hearts and minds, it does come down to visibility, as you said. And I think a lot of intolerance is often just a lack of understanding and a lack of knowledge. And I think that my experience has always been that if I can talk to someone and have a conversation with them and they find me to be all right as a person, their mind will change about trans people, about queer people. But when it is just, a Daily Mail article about an abstract concept of a person, it can be scary. And that is how people become quite reactionary against things because they don't have any experience of it and they're not able to fit that to anything that is applicable to them.
Yeah, I agree. It's a difficult task though. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, but it's a difficult task. As so many of any civil rights movement has found, it only comes through sacrifice, unfortunately.
Yeah, totally. I remember one of the first jobs I had in hospitality, going back a long time, and I was out at work. People knew that I was gay, but being on a night out in Sheffield and things getting a bit leery, and a group of lads sort of threatening me because they were aware that I was gay. A group of lads that were nothing to do with the workplace, and then I just remember these really sort of like manly line chefs coming over to defend me because I was their gay, right? Yeah. And kind of like, you've won you've won them over, right? You've won them over just by being a decent person and just, it's leading by, that sounds awful, it sounds corny, but being an example and sort of breaking down the caricature that people might have about gay people, about queer people, about trans people, whatever it is, putting a face and a personality and humanity to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also it's what you just said sort of really speaks to the thing that I've experienced a lot of times, is that it's sometimes easier to look after your friends than it is to look after yourself. And the amount of times where I've kind of shied away from a situation because I've been like, well, I don't need to defend myself in this situation. Whereas my friends who have been like, really getting angry about a situation, and I'm like, it doesn't matter. And actually, it does matter. And you should be having these conversations. But sometimes as a queer person, as any minority, you are too tired in that situation to have that conversation. And I think that is why it is really important that we do all show up for our friends and our friends show up for us.
Yeah, that queer fatigue is a very real, very difficult thing to deal with. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Well, thanks for joining us today, Stephen. It's been really interesting. You've got some very unique perspectives, and I'm very happy we had a chance to talk to you about these kind of things.
Great to talk. Thank you.
Lovely stuff.
Join us next time.